Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.
By sheer numbers, Iowa is one of the least diverse states in the Union, but the contributions of its minority populations predate statehood, and the efforts of these Iowans continue to shape the state. Iowa's population growth in the 21st century is attributable to immigrants and minorities. Be it issues like education, or health care, or economic growth, the next governor must work in a multicultural environment. Tonight, Iowa's minorities question the candidates for governor.
From the studios of Iowa Public Television, this is the Iowa Brown and Black Gubernatorial Debate.
Good evening. Welcome to the 2006 Brown and Black Gubernatorial Debate. This event is a bipartisan effort. I'm Trinity Brown, Democratic co-moderator.
And I'm Isaiah McGee, the Republican co-moderator. Tonight's debate was sponsored and organized by the Iowa Brown and Black Committee,
The Democratic co-chairs of which are Mary Campos and Wayne Ford.
The Republican co-chairs are Mary Ann Spicer and John Ortega.
Our Democratic panelists tonight are Nathan Blake and Preston Daniels.
And our Republican panelists tonight are Mark Elcock and Mimi Lopez.
Our candidates tonight are Iowa's Secretary of State Chet Culver
And Jim Nussel.
Each panelist will ask 2 questions. The questions have not been given to the candidates in advance.
The panelists will be allowed 1 minute to voice each question, and each of the candidates will be allowed 2 minutes to respond. Time will be kept by Mr. Bruce Wilson.
Each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for opening remarks and 2 minutes for closing comments.
The order in which opening and closing remarks will be given and in which the candidates will answer questions has been determined by a coin toss by the Brown and Black Committee.
Mr. Nussel will be the first with opening and closing remarks.
And Mr. Culver will answer first, after which the candidates will alternate with who goes first and then who goes second.
Mr. Nussel, you may begin with your opening remarks.
Well, first let me thank the Brown and Black Committee for hosting this opportunity for us to visit here this evening. I believe that we have a unique opportunity to talk about some very important issues that face a number of Iowans. As modern civil rights leader Tavis Smiley said in his book, The Covenant, by working together, we are capable of bringing about positive change and build healthy, strong, vibrant, inclusive communities. As someone who is seeking the support for governor in this state, I have to ask my fellow citizens, does that sound like Iowa today? And sadly, I don't think it does. We have work to do. We're not working together. We haven't created that strong, healthy, vibrant, inclusive community that includes all Iowans the way it needs to in the future. Well, I offer you experienced, effective leadership that is willing to work hard to get the results for all Iowans. I will work with you and minority Iowans to provide hope, provide opportunity, provide leadership for personal and individual empowerment. We need to work together to close the achievement gap in education. We need to work together to provide better access to quality health care across our state. We need to work together to ensure that all Iowans, and particularly our minority Iowans, not only have the education and training they deserve and need, but also that we connect that to jobs and opportunities of the future. And I will lead an effort in our state to fully eliminate racial bias in hiring. We need to have zero tolerance, and I will lead a zero tolerance administration with regard to discrimination. I will appoint an independent Inspector General to provide the accountability we need to ensure that we root out this kind of discrimination. And I will ensure that in a Nussel administration, the governor will take personal responsibility for those results.
Mr. Culver, your opening statement, please.
Well, I would also like to thank the host and the sponsors of the Brown Black Forum, Iowa Public Television, all the viewers across the state watching our panel, and those here gathered in the auditorium. And thank you, Congressman Nussel, for agreeing to do this as well. I hope tonight we can have a spirited, civil conversation about our values, our experience, and the future of our state. And I want to lead the state I love to the greatness that we all know is possible. I'm a proud fifth-generation Iowan. I'm a proud father and husband of two wonderful kids, John and Claire, who are 5 and 4.5 years old, respectively. And we believe this is the best place in the nation to live. And I think this race really boils down to one question. Would you be better off running things here in Des Moines the way that Congressman Nussle and President Bush have been running things in Washington, D.C., or would we be better off with a governor with Iowa experience who's rooted in our Iowa values? I hope after tonight's debate the answer will be clear. I'm running for governor to build on our strengths in education and agriculture and manufacturing to create great jobs in every corner of this state. And I believe we have unlimited potential here in Iowa to become perhaps the first state in the nation to declare independence from foreign oil. I believe that we can create in Iowa the Silicon Valley of the Midwest and create the jobs of the future at home, jobs close to the land that keep our young people here where they belong. And I want to tell you as governor, I want to make 3 promises to everyone in this state. Number 1, we're going to fight to restore excellence to education. We're going to close the achievement gap in Iowa. We're going to get teacher pay to the national average. Number 2, we're going to fight to give every Iowan access to affordable health care, including 58,000 kids that don't have it. And we're going to create the jobs of the future by being the national leader in renewable energy.
Our first question comes from Mimi Lopez.
Mr. Nussle, much attention in this campaign has focused on access to health care. However, many children living in Iowa, legally or illegally, have no coverage. As governor, do you support providing coverage through HICI to cover individual incidents for children in need? Yes or no, and why?
Yes, I do support making sure that our kids are covered by quality health care. Quality health care is one of the most important ways that we can not only lift up people, but ensure that they can be successful in everything else they do. I've had personal experience with a child needing health care on an emergency basis, and whether or not we have access to quality health care for my daughter Sarah was the difference between life and death for her. It's the difference between life and death for many Iowans. And that kind of emergency care and access to care is very important. We also need to expand the programs that we have now that can ensure that children can be covered by the programs that we offer. That's the reason why I fought so hard for the Medicaid waiver, so that we could ensure that the programs that Iowa create and Iowa works on continue to expand the coverage for our kids. But we also need to ensure that we're recruiting the next generation of health providers to our state and to all corners of our state. And too many of them now do not feel as though they can work successfully in some of our small towns and also in some of our underserved cities. It's the reason why I expanded the community health clinic program. I worked in one in particular in People's Clinic in Waterloo, where we are serving an underserved population of not only children, but immigrants and people who are here because they want to experience that American dream. Access to quality health care is one of the things that is most special about Iowa, and we need to ensure that that continues to be the case in the future.
Mr. Colville, your response to the same question?
Well, thank you, Mimi, very much for your question. As I said in my opening statement, I am committed as a candidate for governor and as the next governor to ensure that we have affordable, quality access to health care for all of the people in the state, starting with the 58,000 children that need it the most. Tonight, as we are here, 58,000 kids across the state, 0 to 6, do not have access to quality, affordable health care. I want to fight as governor to reach out to every one of those children, to work with the families, and to get those kids covered. Now, the good news is Governor Vilsack has made real progress. We've gotten tens of thousands of kids signed up under his leadership working with the legislature. But we have work to do. There's a real disparity in terms of lack of health care for those kids that are minority children across the state. We need to close that gap as well, and work through any barriers that there might be, whether they're a language barrier, and that has prevented some people that are eligible from signing up. We can do a better job, I believe, being more aggressive and making sure those eligible kids are signed up. Number two, we will work to expand the Hawkeye program, the kids' state health care program, to include parents living up to 200% above the poverty level. 90% of brain development occurs 0 to 6. We cannot afford not to invest in our children in this state, and as governor, I will work hard every day to make sure we do that. Now, Congressman Nussle mentioned his role at the federal level as a congressman from our state. Unfortunately, in 2006, Congress underfunded our kids' Hawkeye program $15 million. So young people across the state and families need that money, and it's unfortunate that it couldn't get done in Washington, and it's leaving the state short, but we will find a way and work together to make it done, to get it done.
Mayor Preston Daniels, your question for Mr. Culver, please.
Mr. Culver, what decision have you made in your life that you regret most? And if you had it to do over again, how would you do it differently?
Well, Preston, thank you very much for the question. It's great to see you here tonight, and we miss your leadership, as you did a great job working here in Des Moines as the mayor for a number of years. You know, the biggest challenge that I have, like most Iowans, most parents and most working Iowans, is the balance between our faith and our family and our responsibilities. And you know, I regretted the fact that today I couldn't have lunch with my daughter Claire at school. She asked me to have lunch with her. It wasn't possible given the schedule and the demands on my time as Secretary of State and as a candidate for governor. But I am very blessed to have a very supportive family, an incredible wife of 13 years, Mary, and 2 incredible kids, and great friends and neighbors that help me kind of keep things in perspective. And that's what our state is all about, is the special people, whether it's our faith community, our families, and our friends, and our neighbors. And I continue to work to strike that right balance. But it sometimes can be a little bit tough, but we're going to just keep working hard every single day to make sure we have that balance in the future. And as governor, family will be a top priority. And having that right balance is important, I think, for all of Iowans, and something that I hope to be able to continue to improve upon into the future. But it has been an incredible honor and privilege to serve the people of Iowa for 8 years as the Secretary of State, and I'm asking for their vote and their support on Tuesday, November 7th, so I can continue to lead the state I love to the greatness that we all know is possible.
Mr. Nussle, your response?
I'm glad I had 2 minutes to think about that answer. I don't know frankly, how you came up with an answer that good that fast, because frankly, I've been thinking about this for 2 minutes now, and I was hoping it was a multiple choice question because there are so many that are coming to my mind. You know, probably the sin of pride is the one that I would point to the most. You know, when you get an opportunity to serve the public, you're called upon to make decisions that oftentimes you go out and get the best information you can, or you try to. You talk to experts and people in your community who have some perspective. You listen as attentively as you can, but probably you still think you know what's best too often and don't recognize that probably the most important rule of politics is that it's the art of the possible and not the art of the perfect. My position on issues is just that. It's my position on issues. It's what I believe. They're the principles that I use to formulate those decisions. I'm sure that was true when you were mayor. I'm sure it's true for my opponent, Secretary Culver, that we work to try and come up with those smart answers and those quick decisions that we know are going to impact hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. But after we make the decision, as soon as we make the decision, we know it's not perfect. And we know that we could have studied harder, we could have worked harder, we could have read more, we could have listened more attentively. We could have reached out to people that maybe we hadn't thought of reaching out to. And so the sin of pride, thinking that you know everything, thinking that you've heard everything, thinking that you've thought through everything, is probably the sin that I commit most often. I suppose the fact that I know that will help make sure that I improve that. But it is one that I certainly can see in myself.
Our next question comes from Mark Elcock, and is geared toward Mr. Nussel.
Turning to the Iowa lottery and touch play. As you know, the state has lost about $30 million in additional revenue due to the touch play ban. Should the state legislature send you a measure to reinstate touch play machines, would you sign this bill into law? Yes or no, and why?
No, I would not sign a bill into law that would recreate the touch play machines throughout Iowa. My running mate Bob Vanderplatz and I came out very early on when this issue first reared its, what I think, very ugly head, and made a decision that we were going to oppose touch play machines. We didn't think that when you go in to buy a gallon of milk at a local convenience store, at a grocery store, or even if you go into a restaurant, that you ought to be inundated with what looks like Las Vegas on every single corner. That's not Iowa. I mean, what I think is wonderful about our state is our quality of life. That's why people come here. We're not necessarily known for mountains or oceans. We're known because we have one of the best places to raise families you can find anywhere in the country. We need to work to constantly improve that. We have a regulated casino industry. We have a regulated lottery industry, and I believe in this instance the Lottery Commission went farther, faster than anyone anticipated. They needed to be reined in. That leadership needed to come from the governor, and it needed to occur much earlier in the process than it did. I think what we fail for right now in our state is leadership. I'm not satisfied with the leadership that my opponent evidently is satisfied with from Governor Vilsack. And I see it not only in touch play, but I see it manifest itself in the CTEC scandal. I see it manifest itself in what has now been a hiring and discrimination scandal that I believe has permeated our government. We have not paid attention to the weeds in the garden. We need leaders who are willing to step forward and take personal responsibility and not shift the blame, not pass the buck, not try and pass it off to somebody else, but stand up and say, I'm responsible for it. I'm going to do something about it. Yes, maybe other people need to be responsible too, but that executive leadership needs to start at the top. It wasn't there for touch play. It needs to be there in the future.
Mr. Goldberg.
Mark, thanks a lot for your question. You know, this was a very difficult issue, clearly, for the legislature. In a bipartisan, overwhelming vote, Republicans and Democrats voted to allow these machines to go into convenience stores, grocery stores, bars, and taverns across the state. The state actually went to the private sector and asked them to invest in this program. So it's not quite as clear-cut as Congressman Nussel has suggested, because the legislature, again, in an overwhelming way, voted for this program. Then they reversed course and voted to pull the machines out. Now, all of us were troubled to walk into grocery stores and convenience stores in particular, in my case with my children, and to see these machines. And that was clearly problematic. But the reality is you have small business owners across the state who have invested hundreds of millions of dollars. There are legal cases that are pending currently. And as a governor, I want to fight for small businesses. I want to fight for entrepreneurs in every corner of this state. I want to create within the Department of Economic Development the Office for Small Business Development. I want to create incubators across Iowa to allow our dreamers and those that can contribute in a very positive way to job creation and economic growth to achieve their dreams. That also is the case with minority and women-owned businesses. We need to do a lot better job of that in the future, and I have a plan to use some of the Iowa Values Fund money to help spur that growth and that economic development, not just in cities like Des Moines, but across the street. So as governor, I will fight for for small businesses across the state.
Nathan Blake, your question for Mr. Culver.
Yesterday, Human Rights Watch issued a report criticizing Iowa in particular for using dogs to threaten and attack prisoners. Do you support the continued use of these practices against people serving time in our prisons? Why or why not?
You know, that is very troubling to learn that report came out. My top priority as governor will be public safety. We have a responsibility and obligation, I believe, to protect the public. I've been honored to have the endorsement of the correctional officers, members of AFSCME across this state. And one reason they're supporting my candidacy is because I have pledged to give them the resources they need to do their jobs in terms of training and personnel. We have correctional facilities across this state that are dramatically understaffed. I have not heard, and we need to get those men and women on the front lines protecting the public the resources they need to do their jobs, and I will do that as governor. I am not familiar with this report. I look forward to looking at it, and of course we would be troubled if those types of things are happening in our state, and we will look into taking the steps necessary to make sure that the correct practices and procedures are occurring when it comes to our entire law enforcement community. But I want to commend the police officers. I had the great privilege of speaking to the State Police Association yesterday in Waterloo. I want to commend our correctional officers working in facilities across this state. And as governor, I will be committed to giving them the resources they need to do their jobs. And I am honored also to have the endorsement of the firefighters across this state. And they know as well that I am committed to helping them fulfill their mission and protect the public. And there have been some real cuts in funding, both from the federal level and the state level. And we need to step up and make sure those men and women, those public servants out there that are every day, 24 hours a day, are protecting us, have the resources they need to do their jobs.
Our next question comes from Mimi Lopez, geared towards Mr. Culver.
You want me to respond to
Oh, sorry.
that one? I'm happy to you know, it's easy to commend law enforcement. You don't have to be running for governor to commend law enforcement. We should do that every day. There are some good people who do an excellent job for us in our communities and in our prisons and corrections on a daily basis. What I'm concerned about is that a young man in Anamosa in the main D cell block was attacked by a prisoner, jumped from behind because he didn't have backup, because there was poor staffing in that prison. Now, I understand that it's easy to, and maybe you have to when you're running for governor, you have to say, well, I'm going to endorse the Vilsack administration because that's in my party. But already tonight, we've heard that small business has been cut and incubators have been cut. We've heard that Medicaid has been cut. We've heard corrections has been cut and hasn't been supported. We've heard all of these things, and yet we continue to see support for the direction that we're heading in. I don't believe that direction is good in law enforcement in particular. Our corrections officers have not gotten the backup from the governor's office. They have not gotten the backup from the state government. And in fact, in the view of having 2 escaped convicts from Fort Madison, not only does the Department of Corrections director get a bonus of $35,000, but we hear that the only way to solve this problem is to build a new prison. It's not talking about the fact that in Iowa we already incarcerate so many people, including some of the highest percentages of African Americans that you can find anywhere in the country. And yet instead of building a new prison, what we ought to do is ensure that we have the training, we ought to have the treatment, we ought to have the education, we ought to have the backup and the safety in our prisons to get that job done. Yes, we need to review always what's happening in corrections, but I want to make sure that we not only have public safety, but that our corrections officers are safe in doing the thankless job that we ask them to do every single day in the prisons across our state.
Now, our next question is from Mimi Lopez, geared toward Mr. Culver.
It's to Congressman Nessel, isn't it? Because I got the last question.
It's correct. It's to Mr. Culver.
I'm going to ask. Mr. Culver, immigration reform is a hot topic nationally and in Iowa, especially with our workforce shortage now and in the future. With both political parties at odds on the right approach, do you support the bipartisan, common sense solution sponsored by John McCain and Ted Kennedy to secure the border, enforce current immigrants' laws, cracking down, and employers hiring illegals and allow for a guest worker program? Yes or no?
Unfortunately, the federal government was not able to come to an agreement on any immigration policy this year. It was unfortunate that they weren't able to arrive at consensus. What I can tell you is that as governor, I will enforce the laws. And we have had 6 million undocumented people come into this country in the last 6 years. Congressman Nussle and this administration have failed in terms of protecting our borders. We are now 800 INS agents, Immigration Naturalization Service agents, short. We are 500 border agents short. We are 5,000 detention beds short. The federal government and this Congress have not fulfilled their commitment that they made to the people of this country when it comes to protecting our borders. That law was passed in 2004. And secondly, as governor, I will hold the companies accountable that are bringing people to Iowa illegally, that are bringing them here, in some cases exploiting them. And this administration and this Congress have failed there as well. In President Clinton's last year in office, in 1999, I should say, there were 417 fines imposed on companies for bringing illegal, undocumented people to this country. Last year in 2005, there were 3 fines imposed. So we can have all of the different ideas and some of those that Congressman Nussle have talked about in terms of seizing and deporting, but we have to enforce the laws. And we need to have those immigration agents and those Border Patrol agents in place, and we have to stem that flow and hold those companies responsible that are bringing people here illegally. That's the root of the problem that I'd like to get at. That's where the common sense comes in.
Time. Mr. Nussle, your response.
So on the one hand, we're going to support small business, but we're going to just start levying fines on small business.
If they break the law, yes.
Well, but how do we know if they break the law? This is the problem that we've got in our country right now, is that we've had people who have disrespected laws such as English only, have disrespected documentation, have not required photo identification that cannot be tampered with, have not supported those of us that have supported enforcing the laws at the border, using our troops, using virtual fences, using actual fences. We can't get the Democratic Party in this instance to join us in that effort. And so they come up with what is a bipartisan solution. And you need to answer the question that you asked. My opponent didn't answer the question. I will. I don't believe, even though they worked hard on this, they have one little piece in there that I think is problematic, and problematic for all of us that have studied this issue and have worked on this issue for some time, and that is blanket amnesty. That's the concern that most of us have. Granting blanket amnesty in this regard, and I believe my opponent needs to answer this question. He needs to answer the question that you posed, because this is one of the most important issues that are facing Iowans today. How are we going to deal with just levying fines on small business? I guess maybe that sounds like a good thing to do to somebody. It doesn't to me if the documentation can be forged and purchased on the street for $150. It doesn't if, in fact, we do have situations where people are actually trying to enforce the law and they won't be deported. In fact, we had a police officer attacked in the booking room in Marshalltown just a couple of weeks ago from an illegal immigrant on his 3rd revisit to Iowa. The challenge we have is we not only need to enforce the border, but we need to be able to seize and deport those who are here illegally. It disrespects the people who came here legally to not only work for the American dream, but to do it the right way. And that's the reason why we need these kinds of what I think are common sense new changes to the law.
Thank you, Mr. Nussel. The next question goes to Preston Daniels for Mr. Nussel.
I'm just going to go with gentlemen and let you sort it out.
Okay.
Gentlemen, many Iowa minorities are among our sons and daughters sent to fight in Iraq, and they serve multiple tours of duty. Do you think we are treating our military men and women fairly?
Mr. Nelson.
I believe that they should be supported with pay and benefits. I believe and have supported their continuing education, the support of their families while they're away, and the support and the leverage that we need with their employers while they're serving our country. We've got great people serving us in our armed forces from Iowa, not only in Iraq, not only in the global war on terror, but now also heading to the border to protect our borders from illegal immigration and from most especially contraband such as methamphetamine coming into our state, now 80% of our meth from outside our border from Mexico. Making sure that we support not only our troops in the field with the equipment that they need, the body armor, the material that they need in order to do the job they've been asked to do, but to support their families back home while they're gone, and to ensure when they come home that we support their benefits for veterans, that we support their education from the Montgomery GI Bill, that we ensure that they can assimilate back into our communities as quickly as possible. I've passed not only a number of budgets which have increased veterans' health and benefits, but in Iowa we can even do more with regard to reconnecting our service personnel to education so that they can have the training and education they need so that when they come home they're successful. It's very difficult to make the transition that they're making. I've been to a number of homecomings where I've had an opportunity to speak face-to-face with our troops and with their families. And not only the family challenge of reconnecting after a deployment, but also the occupation challenge is enormous. And the state needs to be there to help support that. And that's the kind of governor I will be as we support our troops that have been in combat and are returning home.
Mr. Culver, your response.
Well, Preston, the answer to your question is we have not supported our troops enough. And I think it is important to answer the question. And one reason we haven't been able to support the troops at the level that they need to be supported at is because of congressmen like Mr. Nussel who have voted in Congress against bonus pay for our troops, against lost pay for our troops that are now working for all of us on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's voted against health care for our veterans. It's in the record. And this is a pattern that we're seeing from Congressman Nussel, an election year conversion, if you will, saying one thing as a candidate for governor, but doing something different as a member of Congress for 16 years. He talked about budgets. His budgets are not only unbalanced, we have the largest budget deficit in the history of our country, $250 billion under Congressman Nussel's watch. He managed as budget chairman to take this country from a $260 billion surplus to a $250 billion deficit. That is hard to do, but Congressman Nussel and George Bush and the Republicans in Washington managed to do that, and he has voted repeatedly to lift the debt ceiling in this country. We now owe $9 trillion of debt. Congressman Nussel voted 4 times to just allow us to borrow and spend to the tune of $9 trillion. But the worst part about this is it was a matter of priorities. We had a choice to fund and help our veterans as they come back from Iraq and Afghanistan, or to give tax cuts in the trillions of dollars to wealthy individuals. Congressman Nussel, his priorities were the tax cuts and not supporting our troops. As governor, I will fight to make sure we take care of those 17,000 men and women who have served with honor and distinction from our state.
Our next question goes to Mark Elcock, to Mr. Culver.
Gentlemen, school safety is a very important issue for Iowa's brown and black community. In light of recent incidents regarding school shootings and violence across the country, do you think Iowa schools should be more proactive in sharing their safety and response plans with folks in the local community so everyone knows what's happening with school children during an emergency incident? Yes or no, and why?
Yes, I think it's critically important that Iowa parents, that teachers, and that school boards and administrators work cooperatively to make sure that we protect our kids and to make sure that we have plans in place that will protect them in the case of any type of emergency or natural disaster. You know, Mark, I would be the only governor in the nation that's been in the classroom in the last 20 years. I know what it's like to be on the front lines as a teacher and a coach, teaching here in Des Moines, at Roosevelt High School and at Hoover High School. I've had 150 kids a day come into my classroom. I coached basketball before school and football after school. And as Secretary of State, I have visited schools in all 99 counties. So I understand the immediacy of the challenges that our kids are faced with every day, that our teachers are faced with, and our parents are faced with every day. I am for local control. I am for giving those local school boards, those superintendents across the state, the power to make the best choice for their kids. Congressman Nussle, early on in this campaign, talked about perhaps looking at consolidating our school districts. I think that's a bad idea. I have been for local control throughout the course of my public life. We need to give them the tools they need to do their job. The problem is, No Child Left Behind has underfunded $56 billion. $56 billion. So I'd like to ask Congressman Nussle here tonight, when he was in Washington, how did he let that happen? Our kids are suffering because of it. Our taxpayers are going to pick up the tab. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in unfunded mandates being pushed down to the local level. I can't find a school board member across this state, or a teacher for that matter, who is for No Child Left Behind. Not only did Congressman Nussle vote for it, his budgets again did not give the schools the resources they need to comply with it.
Mr. Nussle, you look like you would.
I remember what the question was after all of that. Look, a couple of things. Let me just say a couple of things. First of all, it's interesting. I'm not funding enough money for No Child Left Behind in education, but I'm causing a deficit on the other hand. It's just kind of interesting. It's interesting how that works. It's my turn to answer. You've had your time. It's interesting how that works. On the one hand, you're supposed to spend more, and on the other hand, you're not supposed to run into a deficit. My opponent says it's kind of hard to understand how that happens. I don't think it's hard at all. You just witnessed it. Let me answer your question on school safety. This last week, I asked my running mate, Bob Vanderplatz, to lead an effort not only from our campaign, but so far, it's the only effort that we've heard from anybody statewide thus far, to coordinate the information and the response that our local school districts have with local law enforcement, with first responders, with healthcare, and with our state agencies. If you elect Jim Nussle and Bob Vanderplatz, we will have that kind of seamless approach to ensuring that our kids are protected in their schools. You can't blame school safety on No Child Left Behind. Let's blame it on not dealing with the problem and making sure that we coordinate those services. We have right now a plan that is mandated for fire and tornado. We need to ensure that we add to that the kinds of challenges that we've seen. We've had a lockdown today in Ottumwa. Just today, we had another incident. Last week, 9 schools in West Des Moines. When is somebody going to wake up and say it's time to recognize that we don't have to wait for a tornado for us to coordinate some of the state agencies and some of the local law enforcement and the first responders and the principals and the teachers and the superintendents to make sure we do that? And no, we shouldn't share that with the general public, which was what your question was. And the very reason is because all of this information is available to the predators. We don't want that information available to predators. So I disagree with my opponent on that. They should not get that information. We should share it with schools. And I'm not for consolidation too. That was another direction that this question went. So I'm not for consolidation either. Let's share.
Let's share. Nathan Blake, Your question for Mr. Nussel, please.
Many people of color have concerns regarding the recent claims of apparent bias or discrimination among state workers. Given the opportunity, what would you do to ensure that people are not discriminated against based on color or for any other reason?
Well, first and foremost, we need a governor who is going to take personal responsibility for this challenge. As I said in my opening, that is a high priority for a Nussel administration. And it's not something I'm going to delegate to a committee. It's not something I'm going to launch an investigation on. It's not something I'm going to pawn off on someone else. This is a responsibility that the governor has, because along with being the chief executive, you are also the chief hiring officer. You're the person responsible for hiring the departments, the people who are making the decisions as directors and agency heads. If you do not instill in them the responsibility that we are not going to make decisions in a biased way for hiring based on race, that we are not going to discriminate in this practice, and in fact, we are going to reach out in a way that we haven't seen for quite some time in our state, reaching out and recognizing that there are talented Iowans all across our state who want to serve. We need to inspire that kind of service. And it's not only at the departmental level. There are a number of boards and commissions that we can reach out to and get the kind of input from a cross-section of Iowans, Iowans who want to be part of solving problems and coming up with good ideas. They can be part of this process as well. This is a responsibility that the governor needs to take. But in addition to that, we all know that sometimes things break down. There was a breakdown in CTEC, information, emails, things weren't getting back and forth to the very people who could make decisions. There was a problem with what was happening in hiring. There was a problem with touch play. We need an inspector general, an independent inspector general, so that we have a place for the whistleblowers to go. If you've got a problem in this state, who do you go to? Evidently, you can't go to this governor. Evidently, you can't go to his staff. Evidently, you can't find too many people. You've got to go to the Des Moines Register. Well, as much as I respect the Des Moines Register, and that is on the record, I want to make sure that we also have a state agency you can go to for official action in this regard. And that's the reason that I'm going to take personal responsibility for this.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for your question. We are all troubled by what we've heard about the practices at one of the state agencies in terms of employment issues. And I think the governor has stepped up to the plate. He sat down with leaders, Reverend Ratcliffe and others in Des Moines, and looked and talked about this issue with respect to workforce development. He personally reviewed every single one of the claims, and he called for a 90-day analysis and a study of the hiring practices at workforce development. He also stepped up to the plate a few months ago and let a couple of people go and took responsibility for their actions and let them step down. As governor, I will pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. As governor, in answer to your question, we will have an across-the-board effort on diversity training in terms of hiring practices and making sure that the state government is inclusive. As governor, we will look at appointing minorities to important positions, from department heads to commissions to boards. I think actions speak louder than words. And if you look at my record, if you look at my professional background and look what I've done as a teacher and a coach and a Secretary of State, I've always had a commitment to diversity, and I will have a zero-tolerance policy as governor when it comes to any discrimination in the workforce, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. Congressman Nussel tonight has been talking a lot about responsibility. Well, I wish they had that same focus on responsibility in Washington, D.C. We have just witnessed more scandal. 6 of his colleagues in Washington, D.C. have been indicted or they're going to jail. He's taken money from Speaker Hassert. He's taken money from Tom DeLay. He hasn't returned Tom DeLay's money. I wish you would have spent the last 16 years focused so much on those scandals out there as opposed to raising questions about how we're doing things in Des Moines.
At this time, we have candidate closing remarks. We will begin with Mr. Nussel.
8 years late. 8 years late is what we see from the Vilsack administration and the people leading our state government right now. It's fine to do a study now on diversity. It's fine to do a study now to say, why is it that people are being discriminated? Like you woke up one day and discovered that it was magically happening. It takes leadership from the start of an administration to root this out. This is going to be a hot potato thrown in the lap of the next governor. Where is the current governor? Leadership requires that kind of not only agenda setting from the very beginning, but the clear attitude and the clear understanding with the people that you hire for those positions about the kind of administration that you're going to run. Actions do speak louder than words. There are scandals in many governments. Judge their people, judge me, judge all of us on our records. I'm proud of the record that I have, supporting not only diversity and all access to Iowans in our state, but I also believe that the next governor is going to have to work even harder. If in fact we are going to work together, as Tavis Smiley said, in order for us to bridge that gap, to provide those opportunities, to give empowerment, to reach out to people, to ensure that no one is left behind. No one, children, adults, anyone. There are too many that don't see the opportunities in Iowa today. Too many people who don't have a job, who don't have access to quality education. It's easy to lambaste No Child Left Behind and run it down as if it doesn't mean anything. But No Child Left Behind has set standards and discovered as a result that there are kids out there that were falling between the cracks, many of them minority children, who couldn't read by the time they graduated high school. And so it's easy to run down something you don't understand. But it's yet a little bit more difficult to be a leader and to set that standard. And I will take that personal responsibility as governor. Thank you for allowing me to come tonight.
Mr. Culver, your closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much again to the host and sponsors, to my friend Marianne Spicer, Mary Campos, Wayne Ford, the distinguished panel. Thank you all so much. And thank you as well, Congressman Nussel, not only for the spirited discussion tonight, but also for your 16 years of service in Washington, D.C. You know, as I said early in this discussion tonight, the race for governor really boils down to one question. Would you be better off if we ran things here in Iowa the way Congressman Nussel and President Bush have been running things in Washington, D.C., or would you be better off with a governor with Iowa experience who's rooted in our Iowa values? Well, I hope after tonight's discussion, the answer is clear. I believe this is no time to slow down, to stop, or retreat. Governor Vilsack and Sally Peterson, the lieutenant governor, have gotten the job done. Our fiscal house is in order. Governor Vilsack will be leaving the next governor with a $350 million surplus. That's important, and I will be a governor who has the fiscal discipline to make sure we watch how we spend the taxpayer money. My opponent has been in Washington, D.C., again, as the budget chairman, taking this country from a record surplus 6 years ago of $260 billion to the largest deficit and the largest debt we've ever had in this country. I will maintain our fiscal house. And number two, I will restore excellence to education by increasing teacher pay to the national average. I'm honored and privileged to have the endorsement of the Iowa State Education Association. We're going to fight for kids who need health care coverage, and we're going to create the jobs of the future right here in Iowa by being the first state in the nation, perhaps, to declare independence from foreign oil. And I have a plan to get the job done. I ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 7th, so that together we can lead the state we love to the greatness that we all know is possible.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much. Among other things, for your patience as we mixed up the sequence of questions for you.
We didn't notice.
And also for the spirited and yet civil debate. I, for one, very much appreciate that, and I think the other voters of Iowa are happy that this has been a relatively clean campaign, as it were. I can tell that you both have so much to say. I don't think that there's anything thing stronger or more meaningful than a person's right to vote. And I very much appreciate that both of you were willing to come out here and talk, answer the people's questions on these issues. I'm very interested to see the other questions that come up regarding immigration. Mr. Culver, I could tell that you really wanted to respond to that one and didn't have the opportunity, so I will be watching those future debates. Thank you to everyone who is viewing into Iowa Public Television for hosting this event, and we hope to have many more.
Thank you.
Mr. Nussel and Mr. Culver, I'm sure you all know that on November 7th, the brown and black community of Iowa will have an opportunity to join the rest of the state in selecting Iowa's next governor. It is often presumed that the minority community will either shun the voting process or vote based on tradition rather than on the issues. But the brown and black vote must be earned from both of you. As one of the driving forces behind the Emancipation Proclamation, Frederick Douglass once said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand." That is our charge, to make our votes relevant, basing our decisions on the issues we've heard tonight. We have heard the clear choices between both of you, and from workforce discrimination to healthcare access to immigration reform, from educational achievement gaps to the protection of life at schools and elsewhere in the life cycle, from creating jobs and growing opportunities to empowering individuals from the tools that they need to succeed. But I hope everyone remembers here, including you two, that these issues that are affecting Iowa's brown and black community also affect all of Iowa. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes tonight's forum, and we want to thank Jim Nussel and Chet Culver, as well as our panelists this evening, our organizers, Wayne Ford, Mary Campos, Marianne Spicer, and John Ortega of the Brown and Black Forum, as well as Iowa Public Television. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.